of his speech is Nomadic Civilization and Military Innovation. So without further ado, let's welcome his speech.
Very nice. It is a great honor to be here, and I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me at this forum. My personal and particular thanks are to Professor Bulag of Cambridge University and to Monk Tamir Demdinsurin, as well as Dr. Mutlu Chulenbatar of the International Institute for the Study of Nomadic Civilizations for all of their assistance in arranging my stay in Ulaanbaatar, a city which, despite its constant changes, always feels like home. And of course, I would like to thank Minister Chimbab for this lovely dell. And I know certain people out there also received one and not wearing them. You're doing good. All right, so for approximately 2,000 years, the nomadic horse archer of the Central Eurasian steppes was arguably the most dominant warrior in history. With the development of firearms in the 16th century, the effectiveness and military superiority of the Central Eurasian steppe nomads waned until the late 18th century, when sedentary states vanquished the last nomadic civilizations, thus bringing the nomadic populations of Eurasia under sedentary domination. Since then, steppe or nomadic warfare has generally been viewed as obsolete with little to offer in terms of modern warfare. Often the 2 millennia of the military success of the Central Eurasian steppe nomads was rationalized as being due to large numbers of horse archers and their mobility, as well as success with tricky tactics, such as the Parthian shot, feigned retreats, and enveloping tactics, rather than strategy or the ability to execute complex maneuvers. After the closing of the steppes, horse-borne cavalry remained a valued and esteemed branch of most modern militaries, but even in the late 19th century, it too steadily diminished in combat efficiency due to increased technological progress in rapid-fire rifles, improved artillery, and the advent of machine guns. Combined with the fractious politics and rivalries among nomadic groups, there's little wonder that the sedentary civilizations in their victory dismissed historic military success of the nomads. Through this lens, modern military historians maintain the general perception that traditional nomadic tactics were time-tested and largely stagnant, unchanging over centuries. Yet while the sedentary states became confident in their military success, technology, and an ideological viewpoint based on a teleological progress of history, observers and modern historians, however, have often ignored or dismissed the larger significance of the military innovations that stem from nomadic societies, as well as lessons from history. The innovations appeared not only in weapons and accoutrements, but also tactics, strategies, as well as military formations, and even parts of state building. Yet military innovation has been present among the slide. Sorry about that, I forgot about the slides. Yes, I did. There it is. All right. There we go. Okay, gotcha. Technology makes our life easier. Okay. All right, so, yet military innovation has been present among nomadic societies for millennia. The military innovation of the Central Eurasian steppe nomads begins with the domestication of the horse around 3500 BCE in Kazakhstan. This event not only gave rise to the possibility of nomadic pastoralism in the steppes, but also forever changed warfare as the domestication of the horse led to the creation of cavalry. While it is unlikely that those who domesticate the horse foresaw the military utility, at least not initially, this is one watershed moment in military history. Yet it did not immediately lead to the advent of cavalry, which is not the same as men fighting on horseback. Cavalry warfare consists of organized units fighting as thus. Thus, while people began riding on horseback, perhaps in the second millennium, as horse breeding began to support that objective, true cavalry took longer to develop and transform from fighting from horse-drawn carriages to fighting on horseback. This revolution, if you will, was not a simple task of domesticating the horse, as it was probably initially seen as a food source. But once the concept of harnessing the horse to either pull or a wheeled vehicle, or even more importantly, to mount the horse and ride it, it gave those who had horses unprecedented mobility, allowing them to arrive to the scene of battle quicker, as well as escaping danger with speed. The advent of wheeled vehicles such as chariots in the 3rd millennium BCE allowed their users to move trips quickly, but also deploy them to different parts of the battlefield. As the chariot evolved, it then became a weapons platform for archers or throwing javelins or other weapons, striking quickly then moving. Exactly when and where the chariot first developed remains disputed, but we know they existed in the Near East with spoke wheels, another advent, by 2500 BCE. While not as stable as an archer on foot, the chariot carried a psychological component as well as in which the speed, mass, and power of the chariot intimidated opponents. It was not a perfect weapon, but the fact that so many societies adopted it proved evident that it had sufficient prestige and purpose to be deemed a valuable weapon in any army's arsenal. But even as sedentary civilizations improved on chariots and their use in warfare, the nomads abandoned them in favor of riding horses. Riding from horseback required greater skill, as it required not only to be able to stay on the horse and control it while the horse moved at speed, but also while wielding weapons and while others are trying to kill you. Any one of these is inherently not easy, but doing all three at the same time requires a remarkable and often underappreciated level of skill. A warrior on a single mount, however, also had mobility and was smaller as a target than a chariot. Additionally, its greater mobility possessed, or rather allowed it to make a smaller turn radius, unlike the chariot, which needed quite a bit of space to turn. Furthermore, while 2 or 3 horses might pull a chariot containing 2 or 3 men, the same number of horses could be used for cavalry, each having a rider, thus multiplying the units available, and thus increasing the number of men available for combat and deployment, and providing a commander with more options. And if one horse is slain, the others were not directly affected and could continue fighting, unlike a chariot, where if a horse was slain, it's kind of akin to having a car blow out a tire and wreck it. Another advantage was that it was still possible to be thrown from a horse, but less likely, although chariot users did take steps to mitigate this with safety apparatuses such as straps and other devices to stabilize the users. Additionally, the horse gave the riders a height advantage as well as mass from crashing into the enemy when they chose to do so. Yet, despite the use of chariots, the spread of horse riding actually took longer to spread. It does not appear to have been common in the sedentary world on the edge of the steppes until the 2nd and 1st millennia, with a grand range of adaptation between regions. There's a dispute when it occurred in the Central Eurasian steppes when the first was first domesticated to when they actually started riding it. Now, some scholars expressed doubts that it could not have existed as a practice in the steppe for hundreds, if not thousands of years prior to its spread to outside the steppes. Yet even as horse riding entered the sedentary world, perhaps in the 2nd or late 2nd millennia, horse archers and other horse riding cavalry did not appear in the sedentary world until the 900s BCE, with the first definite appearance among the Assyrians in 886 and horse archers around 800 BCE. Now, of course, when discussing cavalry and innovation, one must consider equipment. While many textbooks indicate the saddles originating in China, this narrative only considers modern geography and not historical evidence. For instance, it ignores that while dating the saddle geography places in the kingdom of the Zhou dynasty, they ignore that had nomadic origins. Furthermore, it seems unlikely that most horse accoutrement would originate in the sedentary world, which produced few horses, as opposed to the steppes where nomads, whose very livelihood depended on the horse, would undoubtedly have developed or improved upon existing technology by necessity. Indeed, we find early saddles, and not just padding, among the steppe societies known as the Pazyrak between 700 and 400 BCE. And the earliest true frame saddles have been found in Mongolia, dating to the late 4th to the early 5th century Common Era Mongolia. That being said, as evinced by equipment across cultures, every society will adopt and adapt existing technologies to best suit their needs. While not inherently a military innovation, it nonetheless affected militaries. And judging from the change in saddles over the century, the changes were progressively done with intention. We can also consider stirrups as an example of innovation. While the exact origin of the stirrup remains disputed, it seems most likely to originate with steppe people. Like the saddle, the stirrup was probably not purely a military innovation, but had great utility in warfare. It eventually evolved from being a loop or a rope or leather simply to aid in mounting the horse, to evolving to a double stirrup on either side, and enabling the rider to easily mount, but also stay on the horse, always important. And eventually stabilizing to harder substances so that the rider could rise in the stirrups to either strike a blow or ride while standing, allowing his legs to act as shock absorbers, thus taking some of the stress away from the body. Over time, the leather and rope loops were exchanged for wooden and then metal parts and provided a sturdier platform as was wider and less precarious to stand upon. And this also aided in horseback archery. Although warriors were perfectly capable of shooting arrows at the gallop when not using stirrups or remaining seated in the saddle. But standing and timing the shot with the horse's pace allowed the archer to do even better. Of course, to have horse archers, we must consider their preferred weapon, the composite bow. While many societies use self-bows, that is a bow made of a single piece of wood or other material, the composite bow was a technological marvel. Made of wood, horn, or other materials glued together, as a weapon that could be made with limited resources and could be manufactured by most nomads. Of course, quality varied, but those made by skilled bowyers were far superior to self-bows. The layers of material gave the bow resilience that allowed it to remain strong for long periods, and by that virtue, the bow unstrung took upon a C shape. Once strung, it usually took a traditional bow with double curves. Due to the shape of the bow, it could be smaller than the self-bow, yet hold greater power. Furthermore, smaller size gave it more utility on horseback. While it's possible to shoot a long bow on horseback, the longer a bow is, the clumsier it becomes on horseback. Nomads had long practiced the Parthian shot, made famous at the Battle of Karhai in 53 BCE around Haran, modern Turkey, where the Parthians crushed the Romans led by Crassus. Yet this technique was old even by then, but shooting backwards while riding was an enviable skill. Indeed, the nomadic horse archers had a shooting range of 360 degrees. With smaller bows, they could easily turn in the saddle and shoot where they were needed, whereas the longer bow forced the rider to adjust in order to avoid hitting it in the head or startling it in other ways. And like the saddle, we see a variety of bows among the Central Asian nomads, particularly through time, demonstrating a refinement in the technology and perhaps in response to changing issues in warfare, whether it was armor or other needs. But the fact is that archery was not stagnant, nor was its technology. Now, the composite bow had the advantage of remaining unstrung for long periods of time without ruining the bow. The smaller size, combined with the advantage of remaining strung, allowed the user to keep the bow holstered in a bow quiver, at the hip, or even attached to a straddle. If the rider had multiple horses, and they often did, The horse could easily be transformed into a weapons platform, with each horse having a bow and a quiver of arrows at ready. The rider thus not only had spare weapons and extra arrows, should his bow become lost or broken, but also a fresh mount, again giving the nomadic warrior a distinct advantage over opponents who only had one mount that would tire over the course of the battle. Of course, the nomads also used other weapons beside the composite bow. These include axes, clubs, maces, but during the ancient and medieval periods, few weapons had the prestige or utility as a sword. And due to the sword's allure, it also had a surprising range of variety in the weapon's design. Its length varied, but rarely extended over a meter in length. While it's difficult to ascertain who first invented the sword, one variety seems to have originated among the steppe nomads, and this was the saber, possessing a single edge, although at the tip it was often double-edged, and curved, sometimes slightly, sometimes greatly. It was the ideal use on horseback. While one could stab with a saber, it was the ideal weapon for slashing, particularly while riding by. The curve of the blade allowed the rider to ride by at speed and slash and follow through with the arm and horse's movement aiding in the slicing of the target, thus preventing it from getting stuck at the target and leaving the warrior, well, embarrassed and weaponless. A straight blade, long preferred by sedentary cultures, could be used in this fashion, but the lack of curvature ran the risk of the blade becoming stuck in the body of the warrior's opponent or being jarred from the hand, thus leaving the rider without a sword. The curve of the blade allowed a follow-through that was fluid, making it superior on horseback. While sabers were in use prior to the Muslim Empire, it was not until the Mongol Empire that they became widespread in the Muslim world and quickly among societies that bordered the steppes, and would continue through the 19th century, being adopted by even other states that had no connection to the steppes as the preferred weapon of cavalry. Of course, having all these weapons wielded by mounted warriors is concerning, but does not make an army. Organization, discipline, tactics, and strategy is what differentiates an army group from a mob and an actual military. In terms of organization, we know that at least as far back as the Hunu period, decimal organization was common on the steppes. Units of 10, 100, 1,000 were easy to organize as well as practical. Furthermore, small unit tactics could easily be applied to the larger units as it was only a matter of scale. For centuries, the nomads across Central Eurasia would use the same tactics. Occasionally new tactics emerged, but despite the lack of constant tactical innovation, the nomads continued to enjoy military success. This in turn led to less incentive for tactical innovation. Why change if it still works? Even as their enemies began to understand steppe warfare, this comprehension did not give them a decisive advantage over the nomads or make steppe warfare obsolete. Why? Well, with centuries of use, the nomads became even more proficient in the execution of their tactics. As with any sports team, how well one can execute a play or maneuver is often the deciding factor in an event. Thus, the feigned retreat became even more convincing. However, not all sedentary powers appreciate steppe warfare or studied it, so it became unclear how often someone's knowledge of steppe warfare tactics were transmitted to others across generations of commanders. Furthermore, we do not have many records of armies training to counter specific tactics, or at least as a regular part of training. When there is some mention, it appears to be the exception rather than the norm. So the nomads were able to maintain. Now, yet new tactics evolved with each steppe empire as well as new political institutions and means of ruling. As with other states and empires, nomadic civilizations never remained stagnant. Some changes were noticeable to many observers, but continuous subtle changes occurred whether it was through legitimization of authority or other means. Sometimes the changes occurred through direct or indirect extension of influence. Nonetheless, they maintained their own character and interpretation of nomadic civilizations. Tactically, not only did the nomads improve on the execution of the tactic, but they also innovated new ones in styles of warfare. While many steppe empires did not attempt to expand greatly or extend their role over sedentary regions, they certainly had to defeat other steppe nomads to build an empire. And the problem of fighting other nomads is that they use the same tactics. Thus, not only improved execution of tactics was necessary, which required sustained training, but also the need to add new wrinkles to old tactics. This was immensely important as it made it difficult for the opposing commander to determine what happened or likely to happen. This is made most clear in 1204 when Temujin, the future Chinggis Khan, defeated the Naiman and others. This victory among the most pivotal battles in history is what gave Chinggis Khan control of the Mongolian plateau and enabled the rise of the Mongol Empire. What happened was that the Mongols introduced new wrinkles in their tactics which baffled the Naiman, preventing them from utilizing their superior numbers to good effect. Furthermore, as the Mongol Empire grew, the Mongols not only improved upon existing tactics but also developed new strategies of conquest as rule, so I've discussed elsewhere, but perhaps even a grand strategy. And one of these tactics is the shiuchi, which you can see the map in the picture up there. You have your columns, and they rotate through, firing. What is notable about that, and why the title is there says "Karakol," is that this is a term that Germans would use in the 16th century for cavalry with pistols. A very similar tactic to what the Mongols used, but it's not clear exactly whether they developed it on their own or whether they discovered it among the nomads and adopted it for their own purposes. Now, going back to strategy, the need for a grand strategy was because the Mongols were often fighting on 2 or 3 fronts, or rather what modern warfare might consider a theater due to the immensity of their campaigns. While the empire did incorporate secondary kingdoms, their armies and resources into the Mongol Empire, it always remained very much a nomadic empire. And even as the Mongols developed what might be considered a combined arms warfare theory, they often added a nomadic element to it. For instance, when the Mongol armies, which included thousands of Chinese infantry in their war against the Song Empire, they eventually took the advice of the Chinese general to create a riverine navy. But while they listened to the Song general, they did not adopt Chinese naval warfare wholesale. From the basics of naval warfare, they then applied what they knew of warfare, particularly from the Mongol art of war. The Mongol general Aju should be given the most credit as he applied steppe military theory by focusing on mobility and targeting space and not individuals, and maneuverability even in the more confined limits of a river remained the priority for the Mongols. It should be noted that after the dissolution of the Mongol Empire and the gradual fading of it, there was a decline in military innovation. It did not occur immediately, nor was it apparent immediately or universally to anyone. Yet innovation still occurred in pockets, particularly where there were creative thinkers, such as the Emir Timur in Central Asia or Toktamish Khan in the Jochidamas. Unfortunately, the two fought, so Toktamish's innovations might have been limited in its influence by being on the losing end of events. I would hazard a guess that with the demise of the Mongol Empire, the exchange of ideas as well as the more regular military education of army commanders diminished as well, as the institutions began to diminish. And certainly, as with the two leaders mentioned, there were flashes of brilliance, but they became increasingly less frequent. This is not to say that armies of nomadic civilizations became less martial. Quite the contrary, they remained dangerous and potent. Their efficacy in their style of warfare did not diminish, but it did become more stagnant due to the divisions and fracturing of unity, leading to the breakdown of institutions and resources. Yet the overall quality of the warrior that came from nomadic cultures remained, and there is a good reason why the armies that surrounded them still wanted them in their armies, whether it was the Ming Empire, Muscovy, the Ottomans, the Safavids, or the Qing. Now, the key innovation of the early modern period was the advent of gunpowder weapons. While gunpowder weapons were available during the Mongol Empire, the first cannons even date to the mid-Yuan period. They were not as practical or decisive to become a significant part of the Mongols' arsenal. Still, these weapons continued to evolve. And they played a role in the rise of the Ming Dynasty and driving the Mongols out of China. But how much significance should be given to gunpowder weapons in these events remains debatable. Nomadic civilization did not ignore them, but arquebuses or early firearms still had less applicability on horseback. They could be used, but not as easily or with the same overall effect as the bow and arrow. Advances in cannon manufacturing and the increased production of firearms, however, changed and shifted the military superiority for the nomadic horse archer to sedentary infantry. Yet this did not happen overnight. Theoretically, the shift could have occurred with crossbows, and several medieval observers commented that the increased use of crossbows could be effective counter to the superiority of the horse archer. Now, while crossbowmen could be effective, they didn't greatly alter warfare against steppe nomads. Cannon, however, did. With a greater range than crossbows, composite bows, or arquebuses and muskets, cannons could disrupt cavalry formations, even before the advent of explosive shells. And while smoothbore cannons were not accurate, batteries of them could be quite effective, especially as they did exactly what the nomad armies did. They targeted a kill zone. While the production of cannon and gunpowder required resources and facilities that were sometimes more limited on the steppe, it did not prevent nomadic civilizations from also creating their own firearms industry. Indeed, the so-called military revolution did not exclude nomadic civilizations. The best example of this can be found in the last great steppe empire, that of the Dzungars. Procuring individuals with the technical skill to make cannons and muskets of current designs, the Dzungars kept abreast of the latest developments in military technology. Indeed, during the reign of Sweyn Rabdan, the Dzungars had captured Swedes, whom Peter the Great had exiled to Siberia after the Battle of Poltava, and employed them in making cannons, mortars, as well as bullets. Not only did the Dzungars have their own fledgling gunpowder industry, but they also innovated new ways of transporting artillery. Affixing the cannons to saddles, because caissons would basically fall apart over the steppe over time. Camels then carried them. And this required developing a saddle that could also be used basically as a firing point, so you could adjust it for the range and the aim. Now, this also meant that the Dzungars had to be mindful of cannon size and weight, as a Bactrian camel can carry a load of 150 to 200 kilograms for about 45 to 50 kilometers a day, while maintaining a speed of 2 kilometers an hour, which is necessary for an army to make decent progress. So there's a logistical concern involved. While cannons were rarely a deciding factor in battles in the steppes, they nonetheless could be useful if only to disrupt cavalry formations at great distances. But at times they were crucial. In battle, the saddles were then removed from the camels and used as a gun carriage, elevated to adjust for range. And indeed, the fact that the Dzungars were willing to embrace new technologies and devise ways to adapt it to their mode of warfare must have been a concern for both Imperial Russia as well as the Qing Empire. And it very well may have played a role in the Qing's determination to destroy the Dzungars. Now, many of these preceding points I think should not come as a surprise for those in attendance. They're rather obvious to those who study nomadic civilizations, even if they've not given those particular ideas much thought. However, these points that I've outlined often come as a surprise to those who do not study nomadic cultures. Indeed, often they are unaware of them and have to be convinced or remain skeptical that nomads were innovative in any fashion, as simplistic as that might sound. While unfortunate, it should not be unexpected. We must remember that most of our colleagues, particularly in history and political science, have been trained in or lived in sedentary-centric perspectives. Furthermore, they are often bound by a narrow definition of civilization, what constitutes a state, as well as a teleological perspective of progress. What does not fit into those prescribed definitions is thus deemed inferior or irrelevant in the larger scheme of history. Of course, they will begrudgingly accept an ally or recognize impact, but always with a bit of judgment of a steppe empire such as the Mongol Empire, acknowledging it simply because one cannot ignore it. While the horse archer may no longer have a place on the 21st century battlefield, there should be consideration of how the lessons of steppe warfare and steppe society can be applied to modern warfare. Lessons from the steppe may still apply. Indeed, in the recent unpleasantness in Ukraine, the Russian military carried out an attack, at least on the surface, seemed to be inspired by the tactics of steppe nomads centuries ago. In this, they have set up men on motorcycles, dirt bikes, dune buggies, and quadricycles, or ATVs, with varying degrees of success. When used with artillery and rocket barrages, the quick-moving vehicles often can cross minefields and reach Ukrainian positions. Once there, the troopers then dismount and enter the Ukrainian positions. However, a arriving there often result in high casualties. These vehicles possess no armor and simply rely on speed and mobility as their only protection. Thus, they must weave and dodge their way through mines, machine guns, artillery fire, as well as drones. While spared the Russian armored units, these motorcycle forces do not appear to be a major tactical factor. Still, having experienced significant damage to their tanks and other armored vehicles, one can understand why the Russians have turned to what one analysis has called Mad Max warfare. Now, the ability to cross open space quickly has always been a need in modern warfare to outpace artillery fire in the 21st century drones. Being smaller than the armored vehicles, motorcycles and other vehicles are more difficult to spot on the battlefield and thus to target. And also they can avoid many obstacles, although they cannot roll over so many things like a tank could. But in general, these waves are becoming known as a meat grinder assault, simply hoping that numbers will wear down their opponent. Now, these tactics are not new and indeed probably not based off of steppe warfare. Motorcycle assaults extend back to World War I. And now, as then, they remain ineffective. Yet these desperate measures nonetheless demonstrate that there is a recognition that defensive warfare has outpaced offensive warfare once again. And thus it's prudent for military thinkers to find a solution. Some of the efforts emerging from these motorcycle assaults are not completely astray. For instance, machine guns have been fitted to the carriages of ATVs, thus the rider can dismount and apply suppressive fire, as well as take on drones more effectively than simply with an assault rifle. And also we've seen things with drones. In recent conflicts between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as well as in Ukraine, drones, for better or for worse, are the future of warfare. The assessment of drones, or unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, and their potential to revolutionize military affairs remains contentious, with some saying that will not have a great impact on how wars are fought, but also who can fight them due to their relative cost. This is where a review of steppe warfare might be useful. Small and agile drones in warfare offer many possibilities. While drone tactics continue to evolve, in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, drones have been used with terrible effect, as Azerbaijan used swarms of Harak drones to overwhelm defenses by crashing them into ground defenses with explosives, essentially mimicking an angry swarm of bees. While a crude and elegant use of weaponry, it nonetheless is effective. Yet there are other uses. In Ukraine and Afghanistan, drones have been used as predators. And of course, there's the unmanned aerial vehicle named Predator, hunting their targets, used to eliminate specific targets such as enemy leaders. Again, effective but limited. Now, it is feasible that a large number of drones could be used perhaps in squadrons and using formations. Indeed, those used by Azerbaijan demonstrate this. But as illustrated by the use of drones in various light shows, where the drones fly and comprise different shapes, it is possible for drones to execute complex maneuvers in large numbers. And rather than simply crashing and loitering munition drones into targets or used as assassins to conduct terrorist or sabotage operations, the drones armed with missiles and or machine guns could be programmed and guided to carry out complex maneuvers, and this would be a force multiplier. More importantly, by examining the practices of steppe warfare, even greater innovation can be found. Indeed, with sufficient drones, I argue that a commander could implement Genghis Khan's strategy from the Battle of Chakramark in 1204. The drones could fly to the target in bush formation, scattered, thus making it more difficult to target or determine their numbers or tactical intent. And then deploy in Naur or lake formation. The drones could hem in their opponent, confront them on a wider front. By using this huge or chisel formation, the drones could be in constant motion while providing regular fire via missiles or machine guns. This could be suppressive fire, allowing other units to maneuver or simply make direct and sustained assault. Now, much like the Mongols, it would be important not to fall into a regular melody or a pattern that could be predicted, thus allowing defenders to better target them. Yet, with the advantage of numbers and by targeting a kill zone, the drones would be able to prevent mass retaliation.